Poor girl signed a marriage contract with a 73YEAROLDCO 7 days later. The truth shattered her heart. Do you believe that one single decision could change the entire course of a life? Stay until the end to see what really happened, and then come back to our main character. It all began on a rainy Tuesday afternoon in San Francisco. The kind of rain that does not fall gently but presses against the city like a confession. The marble floor of Hale Industries glistened beneath the fluorescent lights as Lila Hart stepped inside, her sneakers soaked through, her rhizome clutched in trembling fingers. She had come for what she thought was a job interview, an assistant position that could barely pay her mother's hospital bills. But what waited behind the glass door of the top-floor office was something else entirely. Inside, Arthur Hale sat behind a massive walnut desk, his silver hair perfectly combed, his posture unshaken by age. He had built his empire on silence and precision, every word weighed like currency. When Lila entered, dripping from the storm, he looked up, studying her the way a surgeon studies an X-ray. "Miss Hart," he said calmly, "please sit." She lowered herself onto the chair, too nervous to meet his eyes. The clock ticked. Somewhere outside, thunder rolled. "I read your file," he began. "Art student, waitress, mother in recovery, financial hardship." Her chest tightened. "Yes, sir. I am willing to work anywhere. I will do anything." He paused, then slid a small folder across the desk toward her. "This is not a job offer," he said. "It is a proposal." Lila blinked. "A proposal?" "Marry me," Arthur said, his voice as steady as the rain. "Not for love, for legacy." For a second, the world went silent. The hum of the air conditioner faded, and even the rain seemed to stop. She looked at him, expecting laughter, a cruel joke, but his eyes were serious. "Why me?" she whispered. "Because I need someone the world will not expect," he replied. "Someone honest, someone with nothing to gain." She opened the folder. Inside was a typed document, 6 pages, double-spaced, bearing a seal in silver ink. A marriage contract. It listed clauses in perfect legal order: confidentiality, public appearances, duration 1 year. At the bottom, a space for her name. Lila's voice trembled. "Is this even legal?" "I have a lawyer who will witness it," Arthur said. "In return, you will receive full medical coverage for your mother and a trust fund to secure her care. After 1 year, you are free." Her thoughts raced. Her rent was 3 months overdue. The hospital had called twice that morning. Her mother's medication had run out yesterday. "Why would you do this?" she asked. Arthur looked past her, out at the storm over the city skyline. "Because my nephew wants to take everything I built, and the law will not let me stop him unless I remarry. I am not asking for love, Miss Hart. I am asking for your time." Lila stared at the pen lying beside the contract, a sleek silver pen engraved with the initials AH. Her reflection trembled in its polished surface. If she signed, she could save her mother. If she refused, her mother might die waiting for treatment. Her breath hitched. 1 year? 1 year, Arthur confirmed. No intimacy, no obligation beyond the terms. "You will live here, attend events when required, and continue your studies if you wish." Rain struck the window harder. She could feel her pulse in her throat. Slowly, Lila picked up the pen. The metal was cold against her fingers. She signed her name at the bottom of the page, Lila Hart, and the sound of the pen scratching across paper echoed like a heartbeat. Arthur reached out, took the contract, and signed his name with the same deliberate calm. Then he capped the pen, set it aside, and met her eyes. "Welcome to the Hale family," he said quietly. "Your life changes today." Outside, thunder cracked again, shaking the windows. And somewhere inside Lila's chest, fear and relief collided into something she could not yet name. Before we continue, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and is the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us continue the story. The ink on the marriage contract had barely dried when Lila realized the weight of what she had just done. That night, she rode the elevator down from Arthur Hale's office in stunned silence, clutching her bag as if it could anchor her to reality. Her reflection in the steel doors looked like someone else, a girl who had just sold her future for 12 months of borrowed time. Outside, the storm had passed, leaving the streets washed clean under the glow of streetlights. The city seemed quieter, as if holding its breath. Lila walked toward the bus stop, the contract folder pressed against her chest. Every step echoed with the same thought. What have I done? By morning, everything moved with mechanical precision. Dr. Ellen Moore, Arthur's longtime attorney, met her in the marble lobby to review the formalities. It is simple, the lawyer explained. You will move into Mr. Hale's coastal residence in Pacific Heights this afternoon. There will be staff, but your privacy is protected by the agreement. Appearances at public events will begin next week. Lila nodded faintly, signing another document, her hand trembling at the sheer legality of it all. When the car pulled up to the mansion, the air shifted. The Hale residence stood high above the bay stone walls, iron gates, manicured lawns. Inside, everything smelled faintly of cedar and money. The butler, an elderly man named Charles, greeted her politely but without warmth. Mrs. Hale, he said, testing the new title that did not feel real. Her room was on the east side, overlooking the ocean. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, and sunlight painted the white curtains gold. Yet the space felt hollow, like a museum beautiful, but untouched. That evening, Lila joined Arthur for dinner. The long mahogany table could seat 20, but only 2 plates were set. The silence between them was thick, broken only by the soft clink of silverware. Arthur's every movement was deliberate, his appetite small, his gaze unreadable. "Are you comfortable?" he asked, not looking up from his plate. "Yes," she answered quickly, then hesitated. "It is more than I expected." He nodded slightly. "You will get used to it." "Nah." After dinner, she wandered through the mansion's library rows of old books, a grand piano, portraits of people who looked like they belonged to another century. On the wall hung a photograph of Arthur and a woman with kind eyes. Lila recognized the look of love in that frozen moment. She whispered to herself, his wife. The next morning began with a soft knock. "Mrs. Hale, the stylist, has arrived," Charles announced. Within an hour, she was surrounded by fabrics and jewelry, learning posture, etiquette, and the language of the wealthy. The woman guiding her, elegant and brisk, said, "You are not pretending to be rich. You are learning to exist without apology." By the 3rd day, the transformation was visible. Lila's thrift store dresses had been replaced with tailored suits. She practiced walking in heels through the marble hallways, balancing grace with uncertainty. Every mirror reminded her of who she was pretending to be. On the 7th day, Arthur called her into his study. The sunset spilled through the window, painting his silver hair in gold light. He handed her an envelope. "This is for your mother's care," he said simply. "The first payment, as promised." Lila's throat tightened. "Thank you," she whispered. Arthur studied her for a moment. "Do not thank me yet. You are part of something larger now, and appearances matter. The press will be watching. Are you ready?" She nodded, though she was not sure she meant it. That night, as she stood on the balcony overlooking the dark waves, she opened her sketchbook, the one thing she had brought from her old apartment. Between the blank pages, she found the silver pen Arthur had used when they signed the contract. It shimmered faintly under the moonlight. She turned it in her hands, whispering, "1 year, yeah?" From the garden below, she heard Arthur's voice faintly through the open window, speaking on the phone, calm and firm. "She is not what they think," he said. "Give her time." Lila closed her eyes, the ocean wind brushing her hair. For the first time, she felt both safe and trapped, at once caught between the woman she used to be and the name she now carried. The year had only begun. The first week in the Hale mansion passed like a strange dream that refused to end. Lila woke each morning surrounded by silence, the kind that seemed to echo. Even the ocean waves outside sounded muted, as if they too were holding their breath. She had expected the luxury to feel intoxicating, but it only reminded her of how far she was from the small apartment she once shared with her mother. Every inch of this house was immaculate polished marble, gold-framed portraits, chandeliers that glittered like captured sunlight, but it did not feel alive. Arthur Hale lived by routine. Breakfast at 7, business calls until noon, a quiet lunch, then hours in his study behind a closed door. The staff spoke in hushed tones, always formal, never familiar. To them, Lila was Mrs. Hale, the girl who arrived by storm and signed her name beside a man 50 years her senior. That Sunday, Arthur summoned her to his study. The room smelled of paper and cedar oil. A faint hum from the fireplace filled the air. On his desk sat another folder, bound in leather. "This is the official addendum," he said, adjusting his glasses. "We need to clarify expectations before next week's foundation gala." She nodded, sitting across from him. "I understand." Arthur turned the pages one by one, reading aloud the key terms. Clause 3, attendance at all public functions required. Clause 4, no interviews, no statements to the press. Clause 7, confidentiality of personal matters. He paused before the last page. "Do you remember Clause 7 from the original contract?" "Yes," she said softly. "Everything goes to charity if you fie." She stopped herself, unsure if she should finish the sentence. "If I die," Arthur said without hesitation, "it is important that you know why it exists. My nephew Victor is waiting for that moment. This marriage prevents him from taking control. You are my wall against his ambition." Lila's stomach tightened. "So this really is war within your family." Arthur gave a faint smile. Money changes blood faster than time ever could. He closed the folder and looked at her. "You are doing well, Lila. Better than I expected." Her cheeks flushed. "I am trying, Mr. Hale." He hesitated for a moment, then corrected her gently. "Arthur. When we are in public, it should be Arthur." Later that evening, Lila found herself in the library again, sketching in the quiet. She drew the ocean through the window, the way the light reflected off the water. Without realizing it, she had drawn Arthur's outline in the reflection, his steady posture, his hands clasped behind his back. She quickly shut the sketchbook when she heard footsteps. Charles entered carrying a tray. "Mr. Hale requests your presence for a light supper in the conservatory." Lila followed. The conservatory was bathed in soft amber light. Glass walls surrounded them, revealing the night garden beyond. Arthur sat waiting, dressed in a dark sweater instead of his usual suit. "You look more relaxed," he said. "I am still learning how to breathe here," she admitted. He gave a quiet laugh. Breathing is underrated. For a brief moment, the conversation turned gentle. Arthur spoke of his late wife, Margaret, how they had built the Hale Foundation together, and how her absence had turned the mansion into an echo chamber. Lila listened, careful not to interrupt. "Do you miss her every day?" she asked. Arthur looked down at his glass. "Every morning when I wake up, I still expect her to ask me if I want tea or coffee, and then I remember that silence is all I have left." Something inside Lila softened. "Silence can be heavy," she said quietly, "especially when you cannot fill it with laughter." Arthur raised his eyes to hers, and for the first time, the air between them felt human, not contractual. After dinner, he walked her to the hall. "Next week, the gala will test you," he warned gently. "People will talk. Let them. What matters is that you stand with dignity. No matter what they say, do not break character." "I will not," she promised. As she returned to her room, she found the silver pen once again resting on her desk. She had not left it there. Beside it lay a note in his handwriting. "You signed for survival. Now learn to live." The words lingered in her mind as she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering which part of her life was real, the one she had left behind, or the one she had just signed into existence. The week of the Hale Foundation Gala arrived like a rising tide, slow and unstoppable. The mansion buzzed with preparations. Florists carried towers of white lilies through the hallway, waiters rehearsed service routines, and every corner of the estate gleamed under polished chandeliers. For Lila, the days blurred together a constant cycle of fittings, etiquette lessons, and whispered instructions from stylists who called her Mrs. Hale without ever looking her in the eye. She had spent her entire life invisible, and now she was about to stand beneath 1,000 eyes. On the morning of the gala, Lila stood before the mirror in her dressing room. The reflection staring back at her looked like someone from another world. The gown was silver silk, its neckline modest but elegant. Diamonds shimmered against her collarbone on loan from Arthur's collection. Her hair, once wild and stubborn, now framed her face in soft waves. Yet beneath all that grace, her hands still trembled. When Arthur entered, dressed in a black tuxedo, he paused at the doorway. "You clean up rather well," he said, a faint smile tugging at the edge of his mouth. She turned, uncertain how to respond. "So do you, mister?" She stopped herself and corrected softly, "Arthur." His gaze softened. "Ready?" "As ready as I will ever be," she whispered. They arrived at the Hale Foundation ballroom just after 7. Cameras flashed like lightning as soon as their car door opened. Reporters shouted questions. "Mr. Hale, who is she?" Is the marriage real? But Arthur offered no reply. He extended his arm, and Lila placed her hand on it, feeling the tension in his muscles. Together, they walked through the golden archway and into a storm of polite smiles and sharper whispers. Inside, the orchestra played softly. The crowd glittered with wealth and power. Lila recognized some faces from magazines, politicians, business magnates, film producers. Every woman wore jewels that could pay her mother's hospital bills twice over. Arthur guided her from group to group, introducing her in calm tones. My wife Lila. Each time, the same polite nods, the same subtle disbelief. Near the center of the room stood Arthur Hale, the nephew Arthur had warned her about. Tall, sharply dressed, and smiling like a man who enjoyed seeing people uncomfortable. He approached, glass in hand. Uncle, Victor said smoothly, and this must be the miracle everyone is talking about. Arthur's expression hardened. Victor turned to Lila, his smile never wavering. You must tell me your secret, Mrs. Hale. How does a waitress capture a legend? The words hit her like a slap. She could feel heat rising in her cheeks. But before she could answer, Arthur spoke. By being someone you will never understand, he said calmly. The table beside them fell silent. Victor laughed, pretending it was all a joke, and moved away. The rest of the evening continued in fragments, faces, voices, endless small talk. Yet through it all, Lila stood straighter. The insult that could have crushed her only made her steadier. Later, when the speeches began, Arthur took the stage. His voice was clear and firm despite his age. The Hale Foundation began with one promise to turn success into service. Tonight I renew that promise, with someone who reminds me that kindness is not weakness. His eyes found Lila in the crowd. For a heartbeat, she forgot to breathe. When the applause rose, people finally looked at her differently, not as an ornament, but as a person who had earned her place beside him. After the gala, they returned home in silence. In the car, Lila turned toward Arthur. Thank you, she said quietly. He looked out the window, city lights flashing across his face. Do not thank me. You earned it. You stood taller than I did tonight. For the first time, she smiled without fear. Maybe we both did. Go. As the car rolled toward the mansion, rain began to fall again, tapping gently against the windows. Lila looked down at the silver pen in her clutch, the one she still carried everywhere. It caught the reflection of the city lights steady, unbroken. That night, when she placed it on her bedside table, she realized that for the first time since signing that contract, she did not feel like a prisoner. She felt like a partner. And deep down, she wondered if Arthur felt the same. The days after the gala passed in a quiet rhythm that felt almost peaceful. The storm of attention had faded, replaced by articles praising the event and speculating about the mysterious young wife of Arthur Hale. Lila avoided reading them. She spent her mornings in the garden, sketching the sea, and her afternoons helping Arthur with correspondence for the Hale Foundation. What began as duty was slowly turning into companionship. Arthur had grown less guarded. Some evenings he joined her for tea in the conservatory, asking about her studies, her art, her mother's progress. He listened, really listened, in a way that made her feel visible. In return, she noticed things others missed: the tremor in his hand when he signed documents, the way his breath shortened after long meetings. She began reminding him to rest, to take his medication, to drink more water. He never argued. One Sunday afternoon, while arranging papers in his study, Lila found a small, unmarked box tucked inside a drawer. When she opened it, she saw photographs of Arthur as a younger man beside a woman with bright eyes and soft curls. Margaret, the late Mrs. Hale. The sight was both tender and painful. Lila closed the box gently, feeling like an intruder in someone else's story. That evening she carried a cup of tea to his study. You worked too long today, she said softly. Arthur looked up from his desk. You sound like Margaret, he said with a faint smile. She used to say that whenever I missed dinner. Lila hesitated. She must have been remarkable. She was, Arthur said quietly. She had a way of making silence feel full. The words lingered in the air. Lila set the tea beside him and turned to leave, but he stopped her. Stay a moment, he said. The rain sounds better when someone else is listening. Len? She sat across from him, and for a long while they said nothing. The only sound was the rain against the window, steady and rhythmic. Later that week, Arthur invited her to accompany him on a drive along the coast. You should see the view when the fog lifts, he said. They drove in a vintage black car, the ocean stretching endlessly beside them. The air smelled of salt and pine. Lila leaned back, letting the wind tangle her hair. "This is beautiful," she said. Arthur nodded. Margaret loved this road. She said the ocean reminded her that even grief has motion. They stopped at a lookout point. Arthur rested both hands on his cane, his eyes on the horizon. "Do you regret signing the contract, Lila?" he asked suddenly. She turned to him, startled. "No. I do not regret helping you. But sometimes I wonder if I made you lonely by being here." He smiled faintly. "On the contrary, you brought the house back to life." Lomdi. Something in his tone broke the distance between them. For the first time, she did not see him as a billionaire or a benefactor, but as a man who had lost too much. That night, back at the mansion, Lila could not sleep. She stood by the balcony, watching the reflection of the moon ripple across the ocean. On her desk lay the silver pen, gleaming in the dim light. She picked it up, turning it between her fingers. It felt heavier now, not because of metal, but because of meaning. She thought of her mother, recovering slowly in the hospital, the bills finally paid. She thought of Arthur's kindness, his quiet dignity, his loneliness. The lines between obligation and affection were beginning to blur, and it terrified her. In the hallway, she heard soft footsteps. Arthur's voice carried faintly through the air, speaking on the phone. "Yes, I will have the test results by morning," he said. His tone was low, careful. "Do not tell her yet." Lila froze. The words echoed in her chest. Test results. When the door closed again, she slipped back into her room, her heart beating fast. She wanted to believe it was nothing, but deep down, she knew the calm they had built was about to break. As she lay awake, the silver pen rested on her bedside table, its reflection flickering in the moonlight like a promise she did not yet understand. The next morning, the sun rose pale over the Pacific, spilling cold light through the mansion's tall windows. Lila woke early, unable to shake the heaviness in her chest. The echo of Arthur's voice from the night before still lingered. "Do not tell her yet." Downstairs, the house was unusually still. The staff moved quietly, their eyes a little too careful when they greeted her. At breakfast, the seat across from her was empty. Arthur never missed breakfast. "Where is Mr. Hale?" she asked Charles, the butler. "He left early for the doctor's office," he said, lowering his eyes. "He will return before lunch." But lunch came and went. By the time the clock struck 3, worry had turned into a knot in her stomach. She tried to distract herself by sketching, but every line came out shaky. Finally, around sunset, she heard the front door open. Arthur entered, moving slower than usual, his face pale under the fading light. "You went to the doctor," she said quietly, standing from the couch. He gave a faint nod. "Routine tests," he said. "Nothing for you to worry about." "Come on." "Nothing for me to worry about," she repeated softly. "Then why did you tell them not to call me?" Arthur froze. For a moment, silence filled the space between them. Then he exhaled and set his cane aside. "Because I did not want pity. I am not dying, Lila. I am tired." She stepped closer. "Tired of what?" "Tired of pretending that time is still mine to control." His voice was low, rougher than she had ever heard it. "The doctor says my heart is weakening. It could be months or years. There is no way to predict." Lila felt her throat tighten. "You should have told me." He looked at her with the kind of weariness that comes only from living too long with secrets. "I wanted to spare you. You did not sign up for this." She shook her head. "I signed up to help you, and I meant it." For a moment, the old calm returned to his eyes. He reached for the silver pen that rested on his desk, turning it slowly between his fingers. "This pen has signed every contract of my life," he said. "Deals, donations, marriage, all lines on paper, but none of them gave me peace." She met his gaze. "Then stop signing papers, Arthur. Start living." The corner of his mouth twitched in something like a smile. "You sound like Margaret." "I am not her," Lila said gently. "But I care." He nodded, the emotion too heavy for words. That evening, the power went out, a transformer blown by the coastal wind. The mansion, stripped of its polished light, felt softer in the glow of candles. Arthur insisted on making tea himself, though his hands trembled slightly as he poured the water. "Do you remember the first day you came here?" he asked. "I remember the storm," she said. "I remember thinking I had made a mistake." "And now?" She hesitated. "Now I think fate can disguise itself as a mistake." Arthur laughed quietly, the sound deep and warm. "You are wiser than your age, Mrs. Hale." Kuma. For a long time, they sat together by candlelight, saying little. The ocean wind rattled the windows, but inside the house there was only peace. When the lights flickered back on, Arthur rose slowly, resting a hand on her shoulder for balance. "I will have to make arrangements soon," he said softly. "If anything happens, I want you to keep the foundation alive. Promise me." Lila turned to him, her eyes glistening. "You can make that promise yourself when you recover. I believe you will." "Oh, bye." Arthur smiled at that, the kind of smile that hides both hope and surrender. Later, when she returned to her room, the silver pen was lying on her pillow. She picked it up, and a small folded note fell from beneath it. In his handwriting were 5 words. "Do not let them win." Outside, the wind carried the sound of the sea against the cliffs. Inside, Lila understood that everything was changing again, and this time, no contract could protect either of them from what was coming. The following morning began too quietly. Lila woke to find the mansion unusually tense. The staff moved faster than usual, their voices low, their faces drawn. When she stepped into the hall, Charles met her halfway, a folded newspaper trembling slightly in his hands. "You should see this, Mrs. Hale," he said. The headline on the front page made her heart sink. "The Billionaire's Contract Bride, Inside Arthur Hale's Secret Arrangement." Beneath it, photographs from the gala filled the page, Arthur and Lila together, smiling under the lights. But the article beneath was venomous, quoting anonymous sources and claiming she had been bought to secure inheritance rights. Her hands shook. "Who leaked this?" Charles hesitated. "It appears to be Mr. Victor's doing, ma'am." She felt the ground tilt beneath her. "Where is Arthur?" "In his study," Charles said softly. "He has been there since dawn." "Come on." Lila ran down the corridor, her pulse pounding in her ears. She found Arthur at his desk, the newspaper already open before him. His face was pale, his breathing shallow. "I am so sorry," she began, but he raised a hand. "It is not your fault," he said. "Victor planned this. He always knew how to strike where it hurts. We can call a lawyer," she insisted. "We can explain." Arthur gave a faint smile. "And what would we say?" "That it was true, but not what it looked like." He shook his head. "The truth is rarely louder than scandal." Before she could answer, his expression changed. His hand went to his chest. Lila rushed forward. "Arthur!" His breath caught, his skin turning gray. The sound of papers sliding to the floor filled the room as she cried for help. Charles came running, and together they called an ambulance. At the hospital, the white lights were blinding. Lila sat outside the emergency room, her dress still marked with ink from where she had tried to hold him upright. Minutes stretched into hours. Finally, Dr. Harris, the attending physician, stepped out. "He is stable," the doctor said, "but his heart cannot take stress like this again." Lila pressed her hands together, her eyes wet. "Can I see him?" "Yes, but only for a moment." Inside the dim hospital room, Arthur lay pale against the sheets, machines humming softly around him. When he saw her, he managed a weak smile. "I told you," he said in a hoarse whisper. "I am tired, not gone." Tears welled in her eyes. "This is Victor's fault. He wanted this." Arthur's hand found hers, frail but steady. "Then promise me one thing, Lila. Do not let him destroy what we built." She nodded through the tears. "I promise." He gave a faint nod, closing his eyes as the monitor beeped steadily beside him. Outside the glass, Lila stood watching him, her reflection overlapping his in the window. Behind her, the world believed she was a gold digger, but in that sterile room she understood the truth. What had begun as a contract had become something sacred, and now she would have to fight for it. The next morning, the storm broke in every sense of the word. News cameras gathered outside the hospital gates, broadcasting endless speculation about Arthur Hale's condition and the young woman who had trapped him for his fortune. Every headline cut deeper than the last. Inside, Lila refused to leave his side. Arthur slept under the steady rhythm of the heart monitor, his hand cold but still gripping hers whenever he stirred. She had promised him she would not let Victor win, and she meant it. By noon, Dr. Moore, the family lawyer, arrived with a briefcase and a grim expression. "Victor has called for an emergency board meeting," she said. "He intends to have Arthur declared legally unfit to run the company." Lila stood tall. "Then we will go." Dr. Moore hesitated. "The board is hostile. They think you manipulated him." "Then I will show them the truth," Lila said, her voice steady. "Arthur would not want me to hide." Lou. By late afternoon, she walked into the Hale Industries boardroom, wearing the same silver dress she had worn at the gala. The board members looked up, their eyes sharp and judgmental. At the head of the table stood Victor, smiling like victory itself. "Mrs. Hale," he said smoothly, "how kind of you to join us. You must be tired after last night's performance." Lila ignored the jab and set a folder on the table. "This meeting is about Arthur Hale's legacy," she said, "and I intend to protect it." Victor leaned back in his chair. "Legacy? You mean your inheritance? Do not insult us." Dr. Moore spoke up. "Mr. Hale personally authorized his wife to act in his stead until he recovers." She slid a signed document across the table. "This is his directive, sealed with his signature and the Hale corporate stamp." Victor glanced at it, laughing softly. "Forged, obviously." "It is not forged," a voice said from the doorway. Every head turned. Arthur Hale stood there, pale but upright, supported by a cane. The room went silent. "Uncle," Victor stammered, "you should be resting." "I will rest when the truth rests," Arthur said. He walked slowly to the head of the table, his eyes hard as glass. "You have spent years chasing my empire, Victor. You forgot that the real power was never the money, it was the purpose." He looked at Lila and gave a faint nod. "You reminded me of that." Then he opened a folder of his own. "Effective immediately, I am resigning as Chief Executive Officer and transferring full authority of the Hale Foundation and all charitable assets to Lila Hart Hale, Trustee and Director. The company will remain operational, but its profits will serve the foundation permanently." The board erupted into whispers. Victor's face drained of color. "You cannot do this," he said. Arthur lifted the silver pen, the same pen that had signed their marriage contract. His hand trembled, but his voice did not. "Watch me." The pen touched paper, his signature flowing in clean strokes. Cameras flashed as Dr. Moore confirmed the legal stamp. It was done. Arthur turned to Victor. "You built nothing, so you lose nothing. But she gave this family back its soul." Lila felt tears sting her eyes as Arthur handed her the pen. "It belongs to you now," he whispered. Security escorted Victor from the room as murmurs of approval filled the air. When they stepped outside, the evening light poured through the glass walls, warm and gold. Arthur leaned on her arm, smiling faintly. "Now it is finished," he said. Lila shook her head. "No, now it begins." For the first time he laughed, soft and free, and as the doors closed behind them, the world outside finally began to see not a scandal but a story of redemption. 1 week later, the ocean was calm again. The waves that once pounded the cliffs below the Hale mansion now moved in slow, steady rhythm, like a heartbeat that had finally found peace. Arthur Hale passed away quietly that Friday morning, just as the sun reached the horizon. Lila was with him. He had asked her to open the window so he could hear the sea one last time. His hand was still warm when it slipped from hers, and his final words were simple: "You kept your promise." Lie. The funeral was small, just family, a few colleagues, and the staff who had served him for decades. The sky was clear, the air filled with the scent of salt and lilies. Lila stood beside the casket, wearing a plain black dress, no jewelry, no performance. The press was kept far away. This was not their story anymore. After the ceremony, she returned to the mansion, which now belonged to the Hale Foundation. The lawyers confirmed everything Arthur had declared: his estate, his shares, even his art collection had been transferred to the Foundation for Charitable Work. Her own name appeared not as an heir, but as trustee and director, exactly as he intended. That evening, she walked through the house one last time. The rooms felt softer now, no longer cold monuments to a billionaire's solitude. She paused at the study where he had worked every day. On his desk, resting neatly atop a sealed envelope, was the silver pen. Her hands trembled as she opened the letter. Arthur's handwriting, steady and deliberate, filled the page. "Lila, if you are reading this, it means I have finally kept my end of the bargain. You gave me something no contract ever could: peace. You reminded me that kindness is not a transaction. Use what we built not to preserve my name, but to protect others from the silence that once consumed me. The Hale Foundation is yours now. Sign only what you believe in. Arthur." Tears slipped down her cheeks as she folded the letter and placed it back on the desk. She picked up the pen, holding it tightly. For a moment, the room seemed to hum with the echo of his voice. Weeks later, the Hale Foundation held its first major event under her leadership. The hall was filled with people from every walk of life: artists, students, community workers, and families who had once been forgotten. On the stage behind her, A banner read, "The One Kindness Initiative." When she spoke, her voice was calm but firm. Arthur Hale believed success meant nothing without compassion. Tonight, we honor that belief not with speeches but with action. Applause rose like a tide. Cameras flashed. But for once, the light did not feel invasive. It felt like blessing. Later, in her art gallery, a small room inside the foundation building, Lila unveiled her newest painting. It showed two hands clasped across a white page, a silver pen resting between them. The title beneath it read, "1 Week." She stood in front of it for a long time, then whispered, "You were right, Arthur. Love is not a promise. It is a signature you keep." Outside, the ocean wind carried the sound of distant bells, soft and clear, as the sun dipped below the horizon. For Lila, the story that began with a contract had ended not in tragedy, but in truth a love written not on paper, but in action, and sealed forever by kindness.